Hey, welcome to 2026. It's great to be back. Apologies for the hiatus. I have a 4-month-old child who just doesn't love sleep. I don't know what it is about me having babies, but we have the babies that don't do the sleep. So maybe that's like a factory setting or something. I don't know. Can you like send them back to the factory and then ask for one that does the sleeping thing? Because that would be fantastic. But nevertheless, we have an interesting podcast episode for you today, how to close a sale without being pushy. This is probably the number one question that comes through when we survey our audience, when you get the playbook and come into our group. And it's how to close a sale without being pushy. So let's dive into it today. Hopefully within the next 7 to 8 minutes, give you the confidence to close a sale just by some of the perspective that we share on the podcast. This is essentially the ethos is listen to one of these podcast episodes, bring some confidence into your next call, close a call, tell me about it. Let's celebrate. Awesome, fantastic, win-win all round. So let's start with number one, how to close a sale without sounding or being or feeling salesy or pushy or sleazy. The first thing is understanding that there's a presupposition in this question, which is that sales is pushy or sales is sleazy. Now, is that ultimately true? Well, kind of yes. If we look at the traditional way sales has been shown or demonstrated or taught, we have this bro alpha sales culture, which is very always be closing, boiler room, close at all costs, which seems to be popular at the moment, that people, my people, they don't love. And some of the people who do potentially enjoy a little bit of harder selling, they're starting to try to find like, how do I sustain that over a long period of time? Because you might be able to pretend for a couple of calls, but like you have to be a really special kind of salesperson to get away with that alpha chat style selling and for it to feel good. So if you're the kind of person that actually wants to feel good selling and doesn't want to pretend to be someone that they're not, you're going to love our philosophy, right? And so the presupposition in this question is that sales is pushy. And essentially it's kind of true. A lot of the traditional way that we're taught, if we think about the Grant Cardones, if we think about the information selling space, it's very much get the deal at all costs, belief change people, drag them into into the sale, convince them heavily. And that tends to be the norm, right? So this is where this presupposition comes from. And the problem with that is people aren't shown another way. There isn't a lot of evidence out there to say, hey, there's actually a different way to do it. You don't have to sell that way. And this is largely what our philosophy is built around. Is you don't have to be an alpha bro salesperson. You don't have to really hard push people. You don't have to spend hours handling objections at the end of the call. In fact, sales really, for us, is just a conversation about where someone is now and where they want to go. And then it's handling objections like concerns, like adults. So it's almost like selling for adults, selling for emotionally mature people, selling for people that just want to have a structured conversation that feels natural, authentic, but gets the job done. And so to answer this question of how do we close a sale without being pushy, it's number one, understanding the presupposition which is in sales or the dogma you're fighting against, which is that all sales is sleazy. So once we understand that and we have awareness of that, then we can deploy step number two, which is we don't have to sell that way, right? It doesn't have to be like that. You can effectively sell without needing to be hardcore closey, hardcore Harry closing, super pushy, massive handling objections. In order to solve that gap, we actually have to understand what makes a sale happen or what is a sale. And the best definition of a sale is the gap between what someone is experiencing now and their expectation of where they thought that they would be by now. So I'll say that again really slowly for everyone at the back of the room. The best definition of a sale is where somebody is now, what they're experiencing now versus their expectation of where they thought they would be right now. Now, your job, if you want to lose this how to close sales without being pushy, is to number one, be aware of the presuppositions of sales, that it is, that people believe it's sleazy, that it's bad, etc. Decide that there is a better way, and then learn a proven system or framework that aligns with the way that you want to sell. We call that conversational sales. We call it cognitive dissonance. This is the way that we sell. And it's centered around this idea of there is an experience that someone has now, there is a reality they're experiencing, and there is an expectation of where they would rather be. That gap is what allows people to buy. We call that cognitive dissonance inside of our conversational sales methodology. Methodology. So that's the thing we need to understand is where can I get a proven framework? How can I use a proven framework to do that? Now, if you have a copy of the playbook, it's $11.90. I teach it in there. You can get our step-by-step, how does it work, etc. But let's just touch on it briefly, right? In order for someone to make a decision, they need to balance the logic and emotion of the consequence of an action and the outcome of taking action, right? They need to balance the consequence of an action logically, how would that impact their circumstances? And they need to weigh up the future. right? What would happen if they had the outcome, how that would affect them emotionally, how they would feel if they achieve that outcome, and what the actual outcome is. So put simply, if we think about this in a sales context, you're on this call, or you're on this podcast at the moment because we're talking about how to close the sale without being pushy. And the first problem that we have here, or the current reality that you're probably experiencing, so the right now, is that you're just not closing enough sales, right? So people are coming on the call and not enough of them are turning into clients. And there's probably an emotion attached to that. It's probably frustration, right? Man, another person showed up to the call and they've just slipped through my fingers because I just can't get my words out in a way that makes them want to buy from me. So that's the logic and that's the emotion of your experience of right now. But you also, in your brain, have an expectation of where you thought you would be by now. And so what I mean by that specifically is, like, if it's a sales example, you probably thought that of the last 10 calls, at least half of them would have become clients. And there's an emotion attached with that as well. It's like, well, it would have been really relieving. I would have had, a little bit more security. I would have felt more confident. I would have felt proud of myself. So there's an emotion and a logic experience that you thought that you would be achieving. Now that tension between the not closing enough sales and I feel frustrated, and I really thought I would have closed half of them and it would have given me a sense of security and pride, etc. That gap that we've analyzed is what caused you to pull the trigger to listen to this podcast. There's what we call cognitive dissonance between those two spaces in time, which is a small problem that you wanted to solve. Is it a big enough problem for you to spend money on? Maybe. You might spend $12 on the playbook if you haven't already, but it's not big enough to get you to spend $3,000 or $5,000, right? So how we then get our prospects to spend more with us is we stretch that gap. So we add more context to that gap. So let's say, for example, we look at you've only closed like 1 out of the last 10 calls and you're frustrated. We want to stretch that. How long has that been going on for? How long has that 1 out of 10 conversion rate existed? What is that worth? What's your average sale worth? Because if you're selling a $5,000 product and you should be closing at least 30%, you're missing 2 deals every month, right? If you're only closing 1 in 10, you should be closing 3 in 10, which is a 2 deal difference. That's $20,000 a month. And that's been going on for more than a year. There's $250,000 worth of revenue. So all of a sudden, from a logical perspective, we can stretch that gap of the 2 sales that you're missing a month. We can tie in a revenue amount, which is $5,000 a sale, and we can turn that $12 problem that we talked about into a $250,000 opportunity cost. Now, there's probably an emotion attached to that. If you are actually going through this and you realize that your conversion rate sucks and you're converting 1 in 10, and you just realize that there's 200, 300,000, I encourage you to figure out what that is, by the way, what your opportunity cost of not closing sales is. You're going to have an emotion to that. And it's probably despair, probably confusion, hopelessness, maybe uncertainty. There's a whole lot of emotions going on. And so when we tie those two things together, we then have a more solid place to stretch and insert a larger program. So if we do the flip side here, right, to do the whole gap analysis or the gap building, what would have happened if you did close those deals? If you did actually have a 30% close rate, well, you would have actually made $250K based on your average sale. What would that $250K done for you? What would you be able to do? Go on a holiday? Where would you have gone? How would you felt if you had another $250K in your business in the last 12 months? And if we extend that over the next 18 months, what does $250,000 do for your business? What changes? Your business literally grows just because your conversion rate went up 20%. Nothing else. Same leads, just bumped by 20%. So now we have this gap between where you are now, the consequence of it with time, and where you expect it to be with the consequence of time and the emotions that go with that. And so this is where, if we were to position like a $500 to $1,000 product, it makes more sense. Because if you were to spend $500 to solve that problem and make $250K or solve the $250,000 hole, that feels great. Frankly, that sounds like a great idea. So this is the power of using this cognitive dissonance, this natural part of our brain that has problems, and pulling out the problem to present our services. Now, the mistake that most people make here of how we sell without sounding pushy is they then present their solutions. It's like, okay, cool, then do this thing. But what we do instead is we do something called reverse selling, which is also based on this, right? Based on this problem, imaginary problem that you have. What do you need from us in order to make it, in order to solve it? Now, the reason why this is great is the prospect then tells us, what do they need? Or what do they need to solve the problem? Because you might find that someone only wants a self-paced learning, so they want to spend $500 on a program. You might find that someone really values one-to-one contact, right? So they want to be trained personally by you. So that's a high ticket offer. So when we sell this way, We're actually selling a way that maximizes revenue, but also maximizes service to the prospect. And it's not pushy because they told you what they wanted and you presented it. So that's the kind of shorthand question of how do we answer this question of how to close a sale without being pushy. Is number one, we be aware of the presuppositions of sales. We accept them, and then we accept that we need to do something differently. We need to upskill. We need a proven framework. Then the next step is to establish a gap, the difference between where somebody is now and where they want to be. Then we want to extend that gap, right? By using utilization, by using time as a consequence. And then we want to reverse sell. We want to get them to tell us what they need. So when they tell us what they need, we can no longer be pushy because it's just about solution matching. So going, okay, cool. You want this? I've got that. So I hope today's podcast was valuable. If it was, fantastic. Let me know in the comments down below. Welcome back to the new year. I will see you in the next one.